The people on our doorstep want to hurt us. There's rioting in the streets, for God's sake.
The Occupation is a fixed-time investigative thriller set in 1980s England. It's out on March the 5th, 2019.
Agreed.
Yeah. Mike Williams is here to talk to you a little bit about that. A guy who, at one point in his life, was a journalist. And now you'll be taking on the role of a journalist.
Yeah.
Where you, both in real life and in the game, cannot murder anybody. So we want to get to the bottom of what's this game all about, and can it make not murdering people fun?
It very much can. The Occupation is actually, it's very impressive what it manages to do. On paper, it might seem a little bit restricting because there's a time limit, and there's a story pan that plays out over the course of sort of 4 hours
in real time.
In real time, and this is something that I knew and heard and absolutely knew full well going in, but it still took me some time when I was playing it to sort of adjust to the fact that time was passing very, very slowly in the game. Like the opening chapter is fantastic sort of, set piece that lets you, and that's kind of a model for the whole game that lets you kind of experience what this game's all about. There is a little prologue that you play through,
right?
But then there's the big full sort of opening chapter is leading up to an interview. So you've got an interview at 4:00. You arrive at a building and you've got your briefcase with you, and you get given like an agenda for the day, and it's like, you've got a meeting in this room at 4:00 with this person. Make sure you're there. You're there a bit early, so feel free to make yourself at home and have a look around. It's like this big sort of art gallery museum looking building with personnel offices and stuff. So what you do in that hour is up to you. Like theoretically, you could just sit there and wait for the interview and then have a shit interview. But you could go rooting around and digging through people's desks and logging into computers and checking people's emails and trying to develop. And you've got like this dossier that you can bring up. Yeah, really easy. I was playing it on PC, I should say.
Yeah, the game is releasing as well on PS4 and Xbox One.
And it makes a lot of sense when you play it on PC because there is typing to do in it a little bit. Like you've got to type in passwords and shit like that. And it just feels great to do it and have it like pop up on the screen. It's such a basic thing, but it plays out really well. So you've got an hour to prepare for this interview, and you're developing a case, and as you find things out, you get questions. You pick up questions. So, there's been some death threats and some things like that. So I better ask her about that. So then that pops up. So you're trying to develop a list of questions to ask this person in the interview. So the aim of the game, as opposed to something like Dishonored, which the developers have been very open in saying this is kind of like Dishonored but without the killing. Instead of just trying to murder someone, you're trying to establish the facts of a situation before this big government act is passed.
Yeah. So the situation that happened, by the way, that's kicked off this whole tumultuous event, I suppose, is it an explosion that happened? The game's set in like the 80s in England. Yeah. An explosion has triggered something. Yeah. And it's sort of threatened to, to quote the developers here, erode civil liberties. And it's your job to find out and question who's responsible for this. Not in some sort of Guy Fawkes way, I guess. But that's the sort of blurb that we've got. Yeah. We're trying to figure out what has happened, why has this explosion happened, and what will happen after this act has taken place.
And the way this is presented is really very interesting because you get passionate sort of thingies on two sides of the debate, and you're when you're interviewing these people, it's like great voice acting, like there's an interesting. It's set in Manchester. There's interesting accents in there and stuff. There's like it makes a difference though, and it feels as a British person, it feels like pretty good, and you're sort of. It does suck you in a really good way. There's a sequence right at the beginning, actually, where you're sort of scurrying through all these like Coronation Street back alleys in Manchester, and it's great. It's really good. It's like you feel like you're on Google Maps or something like that, like in an atmospheric Google Map, because it's just nowhere that I've been in a game before. Yeah, and that sort of counted for a lot.
That's something that I suppose anybody being British, because a lot of Western culture is very Americanized.
Exactly.
It's very nice to see, especially rural England.
I've been in New York so much.
Exactly.
Right, and so this is a game that puts you in Manchester, which is weirdly sort of nice.
And in the 1980s as well, not a cell phone in sight.
Well, and that plays it. That's an actual masterstroke, I've got to say, because it plays into the mechanics. So if you're, in like hacking films and shit, and someone's like plugging in a USB drive and they're like transferring files, that takes ages because it's the 80s. So you put in a floppy disk.
56K.
Yeah, honest to God, you put in a floppy disk and it's like and you can hear the PC writing, and you're like looking at this bar slowly creeping across the screen, and you know that like this person's on a routine and they're going to be back in the office after 3:30, and you're like, shit, I've got to get this done.
So how much of this is sort of stealth based then? Because it does,
a lot of it.
You're saying Dishonored, and that's obviously a very well-renowned game for its sort of take anything approach, but the majority of the game revolves around, it feels like a stealthy approach. This, you're playing a journalist, I suppose the methods that you're using to obtain a case or evidence isn't going to be sort of given to you by the people you're speaking to freely. So you're sneaking into offices and doing stuff like eavesdropping, I imagine. Yeah,
it's a very interesting combination of LA Noire investigation, and you've got, like I said, you've got a dossier, which is very much like the Notebook in LA Noire, so which you need to refer to. It's got really valuable information in there. You know, if you go up to like enter a passcode, it doesn't just tell you what the passcode is. You've got to know what the passcode is and check your dossier because you've read it in a file or in an email somewhere else earlier on. So everything's sort of physical and tangible in the world, which is a really good part of the game. Because the game is such as like a tight, confined experience, it means there's an awful lot of detail in all these places.
That's right.
So stealth is a huge element of it, 100%. It is mainly a stealth game, I would say. But then investigation is you've got to really appreciate what that word means. When you hear a first-person investigation game,
it doesn't just mean pick up an item, rotate it so you find the hidden thing inside it, and then
there's a bit of that, but that's just like one of the tricks up their sleeve, if you know what I mean. The schedule, the timekeeping thing is actually huge, and this is what I was saying right at the beginning. Like, you know that you've got a meeting at 4:00. You press T on the keyboard, he brings up the watch, he looks at his watch, and then it's like, oh, it's only 3:10, but I've been playing this for 10 minutes. So it's taken 10 minutes so it really, you're
feeling every single second
exactly
of the game, right?
And there's a lot of planning to do, and trying to, the investigation part of it is really, really entertaining and interesting. It doesn't just mean stealth and puzzles. That's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't just mean
there's deduction and things like that.
Absolutely.
Now, games like Return to the Obra Dinn have really achieved a lot in terms of sort of pacifist run gaming and investigative stuff. Deduction is something that we're seeing rising a lot. This takes place in 1 sort of hour at a time. I think the full game is about 4 hours. Do you think it's a game that you can replay? Because the Return to the Obra Dinn, the only thing about that is what happened, and you find that one way or another. But in this, it looks like you can miss key pieces of evidence and stuff like that.
Yes. So as I was saying earlier, you're sort of preparing, say, for an interview. And this is sort of the sales pitch that they were given as well for it. This is how they've been trying to explain the game. And it is that unique of an experience. Don't just think it's going to be a walking sim, or when you're up against the clock and when all these different elements coming together, it is a really sort of interesting, unique experience. It is doing something new, I think, for sure. These events playing out within this building, people are on a schedule, not in a Skyrim sense, where they're out doing a bit of gardening in the day and they're sleeping at night. These are gameplay things that you need to consider. They're going to be in the printer room at this time, so I need to use that as my opportunity to sneak into their office and rummage through their so you've got to plan ahead what you're going to do,
and if you don't, you risk being caught, and if you do,
well, what you're trying to get, like I said, you're trying to get these questions, right? And then so you could go into the interview without any questions and have a very unsuccessful interview and not get anywhere, or you could nail it. You could make sure you chase up all these leads, develop them into as much as you can, and make sure you tick all these things off. And that's what your aim is to gather as much information as you can. And because you can miss stuff, and you probably will the first time, that's where the replayability comes in.
It sounds like something very interesting. The first thing that I saw that was interesting to me is that there's no health bar, there's no energy bar, there's no guns and stuff. So time is your biggest thing. And if you do get caught,
there's no
you'll
combat.
That's it. Because if you get caught by a security guard, you'll lose 15 minutes.
When you get caught by a security guard, it's amazing, because the guy goes, Steve, there's been a break-in in this in the library or whatever. Can you go and check it out? And Steve's like, all right. And then Steve goes and checks it out. And then if he sees you, he's like, what are you doing in here? Do you mind getting out? It's like so very low British stakes. It's really it's great, man.
Sorry to have to do this to you, mate. But you wouldn't mind leaving, would you?
Exactly. And then when you leave, they go, "Thank you, cheers, mate. Thanks for doing that." It's just that you're not allowed there. Really, you're a visitor. Do you know? It's proper. It's good. It's got a lovely tone to it. The atmosphere is really nice. The art style's quite sort of simplistic, but it's effective. It works really well.
Seems like a very, very interesting premise. And the game itself releases on the 5th of March, so really not long to go.
Well, I should say the only sort of problem that I've had with it, the only thing that I have very much not enjoyed, is the saving system on it. You play the game in full sort of chapters, and the game saves at the end of the chapter. So that means you could play for a full hour of real time. You might have a power cut, you might have to leave the computer, you might whatever, and lose a lot of progress and have to go back and do it all again. Now, because
Not
it's
good
quite
if you're 53 minutes into your hour-long chapter.
exactly, which could, you know, feasibly could happen and could be very irritating to someone. And I'm sure there's a reasonable design decision behind that. They could, you know, having an autosave system or something maybe wasn't a great idea for whatever reason, or it wasn't possible for whatever reason. But yeah, it does sort of, that could sting a bit, I think, for sure. There was slight sort of performance problems as well, but there has been a massive patch, and that seems to have evened things out. And yeah, it runs really nice, and yeah, it's just a good experience, really interesting game.
Well, there we go. That's The Occupation. It's out on PS4, Xbox One, and of course, PC on the 5th of March, which is very, very soon. Cheers,
Indeed.
Mike. Thanks very much. And
Thanks.
thanks to you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.